now. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The day is October 19th, a Friday. The time is at the moment 10:04 on a wet, rainy Friday morning in Frisco, Texas. And let's see, a couple of announcements. I put them out. First of all, if you were late on the test, do not email me the test. If you're late on the test, well, you're late. I have opened it for late submissions. I've been in this racket a while, and I know that that's going to happen. So I just deal with it. Anyway, so it's open for late submissions, and the quicker you get it in, the less penalty. Okay, so get them turned in, please. Put this down. Let's see, what else have we got? I don't have much else to talk about on that. Let me review just a minute, and I'm going to go back to, what was it, the one before, yeah, the module 7. Okay, module 7 was data aggregation. And let me go to page 3, module 7, page 3. And when we have a aggregate function, okay, when this rule triggers, when we have an aggregate function, what is an aggregate function? Aggregate function is count, sum, average, min, or max, and there are others. I think there are about 28 of them or something. A lot of them are statistical functions, standard deviation, if you know what a standard deviation is, a variance, lots of statistics in particular. But the ones that the database class typically deals with is the big 5. The others work the same way, by the what? Yeah, you have quartile. Yeah. Right. Quartile is just basically take the range and divide it into fourths. Anyway, that you just have to look those up. But this particular one is, say, select vendor city, and I pointed out that we always say count if we're just interested in counting rows, which is usually what we're interested in. We want rows. If I want to know how many not null values are in that range, then I have to say count and give it a specific field. But if I'm just interested in rows, and if I were to execute this, I would get an error. And so the question is, why? Does not have a group by. So we have a aggregate function here, and we have something that is not an aggregate function. Just a minute. So aggregate, not so vendor city is not. So this one's going to bomb. And the new rule we had was whenever it has an aggregate function and something else, we must group by anything that is not in an aggregate function. If we have one aggregate function, anything that is not in an aggregate function must be grouped. This will never change. This is going to be the same in Access, in Oracle, in MySQL. All of them are going to have this same rule, right? And if you go to Access, for example, once you put an aggregate function in there, the rest of them, because you're doing it in the GUI, probably, graphical user interface, when you put an aggregate function in one of the fields, sum or count or something, the rest of them will automatically become grouped by. If you group by a primary key, you're always going to get one in the group. So there isn't much point in doing sum because it's just going to be that value. So if you have the primary key, you have to group by the primary key. It doesn't make any sense to take an aggregate function of a record grouping by the primary key. Just select the primary key and the field. All of the counts are going to be 1. All of the sums will be exactly that. The minimum will be that. The maximum will be that. And so on. So, but this particular one, when I say group by, so group by is going to collapse it down. So each time it changes. This is also called in programming, sometimes called a control break. So every time the vendor, the vendor city changes, all of the vendor cities get collapsed into one, and then we get our count applied to that. So I'd find all of the records I had for San Antonio, and all of the records I had for Austin, and all of the records I had for Dallas. I've got 28 records in Dallas. I see Dallas 28. Okay. San Antonio 52. But I can't tell the difference between San Antonio, Texas and San Antonio, New Mexico. San Antonio in both states. So I would have to group by city and state to break it out. And you can group by more than one. The more you have, the more fields in the group by, the less effective it will be in terms of giving you any meaningful information. Okay, by way of review, breaks it down there. Now let's go to the next one. Let's see, modules. So now I'm going to move on to module 8. And this one will be a little bit longer of a module. We're going to spend a little bit more time on this. Probably it'll be two lectures on it, I expect.
What about the rest of the chapter 5?
Did I not finish that?
No, according to the book. Like we covered having.
Yeah.
I see some other pages after having.
I'm not going to cover everything in the book. I'll take a look at it and see if I've treated it someplace else. I don't necessarily I'm not going to sit here and read the book to you. The stuff that's in the book, some of the stuff in the book is unique to SQL Server. So the question was, is there something in chapter 5 that comes after the having discussion? And there may be, but a lot of stuff is unique to SQL Server, and I don't typically make a big deal out of that. Not that it's not good to know, but I try to keep this class to be about pure SQL as much as I can. But then I stop and talk about those other things. What are we missing from there? Oh yes, roll up, cube, and that other stuff that is unique. I might go ahead and talk about that. I think I'm going to pass on that. I think I'll pass that up for now and maybe come back and pick that up. That is a formatting thing. It doesn't really have anything to do with database. For the most part, SQL, if you read roll up and you do it and you look at it, it's a little messy because now you don't have a nice clean N by M table. So you'll have rows in there that have a different number of columns on them. So it puts some aggregate data in the roll up. So it's kind of like a group by, and then give me some roll up data, some other data in there. So I'll have row, your boat, row, and then a row that doesn't fit. Yes, more so, but that's not the job of SQL. SQL is a very rudimentary kind of the blunt instrument of programming. It is not intended as a presentation language. SQL is like the engine of a car. If all I have is an engine, it's not much good to me. So SQL proper, just SQL, if that's all I have, I can get the data, but they're not going to be very pretty. I'm going to have to copy and paste them into a spreadsheet and format them. Okay, which I can do. So if I want to see that stuff, the roll-up is essentially a spreadsheet operation. And there's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't really belong in SQL. It's not found in anything except SQL Server. So if you go to Oracle, you probably won't find that. It has a place, but its place is at a much higher level. So when I do that, I'm going to go up to the form where I'm writing the human interface, and I'm going to do all that roll up and roll up. What else was it? Roll up and cube, grouping sets and all that stuff. And all that, it's just formatting the output, but I don't like SQL to format my output. Just give me the data, okay? And I'll format it later. No. So yes, that's why I skipped over some stuff. It's not pure SQL. Let's go to pure SQL.
Nice transition.
Yeah, well, segue here. Subqueries. I talk a little bit here about SQL syntax, and I talk about how you can, this would be an SQL query that we might write, where we have what do we have? We have an inner join. So it's kind of a messy query. It's just three tables joined is all it is. So what I'm taking some stuff from vendors, I'm taking some stuff from invoice line items, vendors, invoices, invoice line items, and GL accounts. So I got 4 tables in there. So it's going to get a little on the tedious side, but SQL does one thing, but it could be shortened, and what could I do? I could drop the as. For example, I can just say select vendor name, no comma, and then the alias, comma. The other field, space, alias, no comma, comma. Next field name, space, alias. People will do this, okay? Notice it, I just dropped the as. Up here in this example, I had as. I dropped it out down here. Other thing that you drop is from vendors, where here I said vendors as V. Down here below, I shortened it to just vendors space V. In other words, I dropped that as. Some of them you can drop, some of them you can't. So when you're aliasing, you can. Here's one that I don't want to see in this class. If you want to do this, take my advanced class. There I relax it. Join. Vendors join invoices. And then they were named. Where v.vendor ID is equal to i.vendor ID, or it says on, actually on and where, same. What?
When you're dropping the as, if it's like a calculation, can you also drop the as?
In this class, or can you in SQL?
I guess both.
Okay, in this class, no, I don't want you to drop the as. In SQL, it will let you drop the as. On the select line, any place the as is found on the select line or the from line. Most of the time in a query, you can. It's when you get into writing stored procedures and functions that you have to have it. If you wrote your own, yes, your own aggregate function, don't know why you would, but you could, then you would need to have an as in there. That's the next class though. Okay. So for example, A join B means A inner join B. Left join means left outer join. Right join means right outer join. And here I say the presentations will continue to use the full syntax, as will your exercises. So if I get exercises that just say A, join B, I'm going to send them back. Say, fix it. Okay, because I'm going to insist that we write it, at least in the intro class, we're going to write the full syntax. After you leave here, you've developed your own style of coding SQL. When you get to the advanced class, oh well, you're going to write, as long as it works. The advanced class is more tailored to SQL Server. So what runs an SQL, if it runs an SQL Server, it's good enough. This will not always run on every platform if you just say join. Some of them you have to say inner join. And since there's at least one that requires that, I'm going to require it. Okay, next. Dr. King. Okay. Here is, let me go down here. I've copied it down here. We need all of the vendors' names who have no associated invoices. All of the vendors' names who have no associated invoices. What kind of a query is this? It's up there. Childless parents, okay? So it doesn't matter really. I always put the parent on the left and the child on the right, but there's nothing that says you have to do that, and I wouldn't take off if you didn't. Okay, so what childless parent query, I say so right here. What tables are needed? Hint, hint, vendors and invoices. I have to have both tables in there before I can tell you about childless parents. I have to have both tables before I can tell you about invalid foreign keys. Yes?
I guess the protocol that you use of always having the parent on the left and the child on the right, if you did that, you can't always use left outer join, right?
Well, I do that by convention. It is not, I don't know that it's even necessarily good to do it that way. I just say that's the way I do it. So when I'm pointing to a parent, I'm going to use a left outer join for childless parents will always, in my convention, if I'm following it. Coding conventions are things that are, I think it works for me, that are good to do. But I'll break those rules if there's a good reason. Yes, ma'am.
So I know that outer join and inner join works on columns and unions, and except and intersect works on rows. But how would you figure out in a real life scenario that what are you looking for? Like where would you implement?
Well,
an outer join and
right. Union and intersect are different creatures from a join. Unions and intersect basically take two tables that have the same number of columns and the same type of columns, and they put them together. Union puts them all together. Intersect puts them together, only those things that are in both tables. So union and intersect give you back another table. Now, a table join, you have your inner join and your outer join. Inner join, they must participate in the relationship. That's the property of the inner join. So if I say I want the invoices, I want vendors and their associated invoices, if I use an inner join, I will not see any record that does not participate, meaning I will not see childless parents, I will not see invalid children. Okay, they're not in the relationship. If I go to an outer join, there are two basic questions that are asked by outer joins. Two big ones, and these are the ones I'm teaching and heavily hammering on. They're not the only ones, but an outer join is used to get childless parents, and an outer join is used when you want to see invalid children. So if the outer join points to the parent table, you will get whatever you're getting back, and the childless parents also will be in that join. Now, if you say where the childless parents, where the child is null, you will get only childless parents. Okay. Yes.
Oh, wait, can I share the way I think about it?
Go ahead.
Okay, so let me know if this is right or it makes sense. So when we're doing joins, we have like the parent and the child table and like grandchild table or whatever. So joins interact with like this relationship, parent, children, and then intersect and union is more like sibling tables, I guess. Like they're like similar to each other.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah. Could we? I think of joining as parent-child, and union and intersect are more sibling. Yes. Union and intersect put together two similar tables. They have to have the same number of columns, and the columns must be type compatible, meaning that if one of them is a char field and one of them is a varchar field, it'll make it big enough. I think that will work. Right. It'll take the biggest one. So the smaller one will get promoted. Same thing if you have an int and a tiny int or something in there. I think it will promote the tiny int. Anyway, it's best if they have the same type. So I can take a union of any two tables, and remember the output of a SQL query is a table. So I can union two SQL queries.
You can use that for a join, right?
Well, I can have a SQL query can be a join. So I have an SQL query that returns 4 columns, was on somewhere. Another SQL query that returns 4 columns of the same type. I can union them, put them all together in one table.
And that table can be used for like an inner join.
Indeed, you can get SQL can get quite complicated. Most of the time, SQL tends to be more tedious than complicated. In that it does get complicated. Okay, but if you start going through it, you see it. That's why we only have one class in SQL proper. Okay, let's look at our outer join. Here's our outer join. Select vendor name from vendors as V. Left outer join invoices as I on where the vendor ID matches. And I point to the child and say where the child is null, order by vendor name. And I believe I get, I think it's 89 records. Yes, 89. And there they are. I just threw in the order by so that it would work. I mean, so that I could always get the same. Okay, let me put this away. Now, notice some things about this query that come to my attention right away. First of all of the output comes from one table. All of the output comes from one table. Whenever I see that, I get kind of warm and fuzzy because now I have a couple of other options besides the outer join. So this gives me this approach is another way of looking at the outer join. It's not really an outer join, but I want all of the records that are here. Okay, I want all of the records from vendors that are not in invoices, right? And the way I get that is I join it and then I say where the child is null. That means they're not in there. Okay, whenever that happens and I'm left with something like that and I've got a table join and everything is coming from one table, my life gets kind of nice. I have an alternative way to write that. Let this soak in for a minute. This is the same query, by the way. Select vendor name from vendors, where vendor ID is not in. Select vendor ID from invoices. And then I put the order by there because I want to get the row. I'm not guaranteed the rows will come back in the same order. Please go ahead.
So how does it associate the vendor ID? So where it says where vendor ID, how does it associate that vendor ID with the vendor ID inside?
Okay. The inner query, this one,
Yeah.
this guy is going to run first. Let's see, I think I usually put one tab in there. I think I copied that out of, by the way, this is in Canvas. That inner query, the select vendor ID from invoices, runs first. Gets a list of the vendor logically. I don't know how it's going to do it. It might turn it into an outer join. The SQL runtime support system is very intelligent. It is very proactive in terms of trying to get you the answer in the shortest number of steps that it can do. And as such, you notice that in this programming, we are not telling the computer how to get the answer. We're telling it the answer we want to see. Now you go program yourself to get that answer. There's two ways of specifying this answer, right? This is another one. I don't know that they're going to be any different at all at runtime. They might be, or they might not be. I've got a feeling they wouldn't be. I've got a feeling that however it does one of them, it's going to do the other one exactly the same way. Because logically they are the same. A database, it will spend a lot of time calculating what the best approach is to get it, and then go through it. And so for some fairly small amount, 89 rows, it'll spend a lot of time figuring out what the best possible approach is. Because the database will use memory, will use processor time a lot to avoid a disk access. So this is going to run first. So here I get a list of all the invoices, all of the vendor IDs that have children. All of these vendor IDs have children. Why? Because they came from the invoices table. Now, I want to select the vendor name from vendors where the vendor ID is not in that group. Now, if I wanted a true outer join, I would have to union it. I would need a union with this one. And that would give me the true outer join. It would give me all of them from the vendors and childless parents, all of them from invoices and the childless parents from vendors. So if I added a union to this, so basically I want this one, union, this one would be a true outer join. Remember, an outer join, unless I specify, where the vendor ID is null, I'm going to get parents with children as well as parents without children. Okay. But I said where the child is null, now I'm only going to get childless parents. Both of these are going to give me 89 rows, and since I put the order by, they will be in the same order. And I'll leave that to you to verify. They are the same.
But when you do this,
okay, this is called a subquery.
when you do a subquery, can you you have select at the top level, select vendor name? Can you have a column that's from invoices?
The answer to that, the question was, so can I have a column that comes from the invoices table? The answer is in this query, no. In the previous one, I could have, yes. And so remember, I prefaced it by talking about, I said, when I see this, that everything I'm selecting comes from one table. Now, this is meat for a subquery. I personally, everybody's got their own favorite tools. You guys had C or Java or something? Java? Have you programmed in some language? Okay. So you know what a case statement is. Case switch. Okay. I will very rarely ever use a case statement. When I'm going to do something like that, I'm going to nest if then else logic. It's the same thing. Well, why not? Well, I don't know, because I just don't. If they, maybe they do. Okay. I think if then else is more versatile.
But like if else and switch, like under the hood, they boil down to the same thing.
Rough.
I don't think this does.
Under the hood, we don't know. Under the hood, let's put it this way. Both queries will give me exactly the same output on any data set. That means they are equal. And what the under the hood system does with it is its business. Now I have a way to find out what it's doing. It's called show plan, and I can see, I get a very detailed sketch of what it's doing. Basically, I don't care what it's doing, as long as it gives me the right answer.
What language is working?
Probably, you mean what is it written in the database?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to guess probably assembler. Mostly. It's probably a composite of many languages. Databases are unbelievably complicated pieces of software. But all I do is specify the what I want to see. Okay.
Usually in subquery, you would put a child table within the parentheses. Is that the regular
Here.
or standard?
Well, that will vary. This one implements an outer join. I can also use a subquery to implement an inner join. Right. If I changed it to an in, I would have an inner join. Not in would be an out. Not in union, the whole table would give me an outer join. There's no set way to do it. That's why I'm going to spend more time on subqueries.
So
they get pretty wild.
I have trouble picturing something. So the top query.
The top query is an outer join.
Yeah, outer join. Can you show the equivalent nested statement?
Yeah.
Where you don't have the where, where you have the is null. Like when you go up to the top,
here,
where you say where vendor ID is null. Can you show the equivalent nested query?
This is the equivalent nested query. See, this says, what does this say? When you say left outer join on this, when you give it this guy, let me finish. Okay. When you do this, you're saying give me everything from the vendors table, whether it matches or not, and let's see, no, give me everything that would be an inner join, and everything from the vendors table that does not participate in it.
Right. Okay. So like, let's say you commented out the where vendor is null.
Right.
Okay. So if we comment that out, what's the equivalent nested query for that without the where? It involved the union, and I was trying to
right. Just for if all I'm doing, well, to do that, I would have to say, comma, invoice ID. Now, when I run this, execute. Notice that I got, here I got 89 rows. And for the invoice ID, they're all null. Why are they all null? Because that's what I said. I said I wanted null children. So I got null children. Now, if I comment this out, and I do an outer join, so this is a pure outer join. So this, I'm going to see everything from the outer join. I think I'm going to see one row for every vendor. Execute 202 rows. Notice that I'm now seeing some that I did not see in there. For example, row 1 is, row 9 is not a childless parent. 14, 15, 16, they're not childless parents. So they do not satisfy the requirement that I said at the beginning. We need all of the vendors' names who have no associated invoices. So I'm saying that when you comment out that where the child is null, now you're getting the invoice, the vendors that do have invoices and the vendors that don't.
You're getting duplicate vendor names because there's multiple.
I don't believe I'm getting duplicate vendor names. Because the vendor name is, I would only get duplicate vendor names if I had duplicate vendor names in the table.
Can you show the table? Because it's based on invoice, right? You have multiple cross.
Right. Okay. Yes. I have. Yes, but they have different. They have different invoice IDs. But the only ones I'm interested in are these nulls.
Okay. But you said there was a way to using unions to make a nested query like that, and I was trying to figure out how to do that, and I couldn't.
Well. Okay. This is the full meal deal of the left outer join. Okay. And so this has all of the things from vendors and the ones that don't have children also. So if I were to want to get that here, I would have to say select vendor name, comma, null. Union.
Or it has to be outside the parentheses,
Right.
right?
Union.
But you're selecting from vendors, so how would you get the?
Well, I up here, this is going to give me the childless parents.
Okay, right.
Okay, and you're wanting the ones that do have children also. Therefore, so now I've got the same number of columns. So when I run this, and I think this is going to run, vendor name, let's see. Oh, vendor ID. Okay. They've got a match. Order by vendor.
So order by would apply to all of it?
Order by applies to all of it, yes. It doesn't make much sense. Now, notice that now I got the same thing, but I had to use the vendor ID. Got a whole bunch of nulls, but I'm also getting the ones that have children. So the vendor ID 29 has no children. Yeah. The vendor ID 30, so I'm actually getting the primary key.
You could have the vendor name in both select statements too, right?
No, I can't have the vendor name in both select statements. because the vendor name is in the vendors table,
But not, oh, not in the invoice.
and this one is selecting from invoices.
Oh, okay. To do that, you would just need.
I would have to have a table join.
Join. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Got kind of sidetracked. Go ahead.
Okay. There's anyway, here's the simplest case. Let's go back to vendor name. Put this back. By the way, this is in the Canvas order by vendor name. Okay, so here is a simple subquery that's translating that to that outer join. The way I know that this one is subquery meet for a subquery, I will probably, if I give it on a test, I will probably say write a subquery, right? But the way I know why I know that this would make a good subquery is everything comes from one of the tables. Everything I need comes from the parent table. Not asking anything about the child. Okay. So an outer join makes a really good subquery, bottom line. Another use for the subquery, what are we, 1045. We're going to take a break here in just a minute. Find the vendor ID or vendor IDs, plural, because we might have ties, with the highest invoice total, the greatest. Okay. Now, one way to do that, I've got count in there, but I'll take that out. One way to look at that is I'm just going to take vendor ID, the max invoice total, group by vendor ID, of course, because we have to, and then order by invoice total, ITOT. Looks like I'm trying to spell idiot and don't know how to spell it. Now, when I run this, the answer to the question is obvious. Okay. Well, what's the answer? Since I've ordered by invoice total, what vendor IDs have the highest invoice total? Just the top one?
Or the top two?
Top two. Okay. So it could have been 500. Could have all been tied for the top. I don't know. Don't know how many I'm going to get. I don't have any way of saying that. Now I would just have to go in with my little mouse and select the ones I wanted and copy them over to Excel. Present them. Present the awards or whatever they're getting. This has some problems. One of the problems is I didn't ask for the invoice total. I just asked for the vendor IDs. So what are the vendor IDs that have the greatest, that have an invoice that is the greatest total? I didn't ask you what that total was. So we're returning more information. The bad part about it is that I'm returning a whole bunch more rows than I need and letting you sort it out. We don't want to do that. Okay. Anytime that happens, this guy is meat because I only want the vendor ID. Now I'm in that world of everything I want comes from one table, that outer table. So anytime I'm in this world of everything coming from the outer table, I cannot get stuff from the inner table. I cannot see the inner table. It's going to get really tricky when we can see them and we passing stuff back and forth. So select vendor ID from invoices where the invoice total is in. Select max invoice total. Now, when I run this, execute, notice that all I get are the two vendor IDs that I'm wanting, 121 and 110. I did not return extra information. Most of the time, that's considered a mistake in SQL, although sometimes we just have to. They say, I want this, but there's no way I can get that without including more information. So if I absolutely have to. In this case, I can find the winners. And I don't know what it is, but I know it's the maximum. And if I'd had 10 of them that tied, by the way, I don't think that I have the tie in there. I had to go in and put that in there to give me 2 to find. Otherwise, I would have just found 110. So the idea being that finding the highest, finding the lowest, where I might have ties for the highest or ties for the lowest. A subquery is good. Another one is find everyone. Here's a good one. Here's a challenge. Find everyone who is within 5% of average, or some percent. Okay. So find everyone who is within 5% of average. How would you do that? I'm going to leave that as a.
Could you create a new column where you round all the
You don't need to. You don't need to do that. You do that in the subquery. And let's take a short break. It is what? It is 10:51. So we will resume at 11 o'clock or 11:01 or something like that. Let me unmute. Okay, I've turned the microphones on. I mean, you guys out there in internet land may comment if you wish.
I don't have anything to say today.
Very well. If you did, I'd hear you. I'm gonna go take a short break.
Okay, can you just leave your code open?
Sure. By the way, all that code is in Canvas.
Yeah, but usually I do side by side, so.
Right. It's on page 1. Page 1 and 2, I believe. So that what I've got up there is just copied from Canvas, or maybe Canvas is copied from that.
Okay.
So anyway, here's the maximum. Okay, I'm gonna run to the bathroom.
Thank you.
Resuming recording now after the break. Okay. All right, my turn to talk now. Okay, I'm gonna mark you tardy.
Not me, all of you are on time.
Okay. Now, notice about this. The only place I can select, excuse me, I clear my throat there. The only query I can select from for display is the outer query. So the only place that my, if it is going to be displayed, if it's in this top select line, it will be displayed. The stuff that comes from on the inner query does not get displayed. This is just what we're testing against. So if I wanted to, so the only thing I can do is take things from invoices. That's okay because we're doing it from invoices. Up here, for example, vendor ID, invoice total has to come invoices. That's the only place I can get it. And the idea when I was working with vendor name came from the vendors table. Everything I take has to come from the vendor's table. I cannot display the invoice ID. That is the max from this query. Okay. If I,
How do we use subqueries?
well, they come in very handy for some things.
Like that was
Some people think that subqueries are more logical. Some textbooks treat subqueries first and then do table joins later. Subqueries aren't as versatile as a join, but they are handy for, particularly for things like finding a maximum, finding a minimum. Here's one. Find me all something, let's see. How about vendor name? Vendor names, let's do vendor IDs. Well, let's see. And the max, okay. Find the vendor ID, because I want everything to come from invoices. Find the vendor IDs whose invoice totals are greater than the average. Somebody is calling me. I let them leave a message. Yes.
Well, I have an idea that so you can get average with the inner query. How do you pass that value?
Okay. Don't have to.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it looks a lot like this. Let's see if I added invoice ID. Let me go ahead and highlight this. Copy. Am I recording? I think I am. Yeah. I'm going to copy. Paste. Okay. Select. Now, max. Well, I can just put invoice. I can just put AVG. By the way, don't be surprised if some databases make you type out AVE or AGE. Some do. Okay. Now, this is going to give me, if I say this, select where it's the average, I don't think I'm going to get any. Because it has to be exactly average. Well, nobody's average. What's that old joke about? No, we are the Monty Python skit from The Life of Brian, where the masses were speaking, and he said, "You are not the same as everyone else," and the masses chanted back, "No, we are not the same as everyone else." And there's one guy said, "Well, actually, I am. I'm just the same as everybody else." And some nice logic there, but we don't. Very few will be average. So I usually want to know about how many are greater than average, how many are less than average, how many are within one standard deviation of average. Okay.
Could we not have written this in outer join?
This one would be difficult to do in an outer join. This one would be difficult because you need a subquery for this one. To find minimum, maximum, find records that are greater than, less than the average, find the records that are within one standard deviation, find the records that are within the first quartile. I don't know how many I'm going to have. It doesn't help me. An inner join, outer join does not help me there.
So you're finding like within one standard deviation, would you need two inner queries, one for the average and one for
you probably would need you'd probably need an average and a standard deviation in there. I don't know. You could probably do it with one single query. You probably, if it's finding within one standard deviation, you would probably need to be above let's see, below the upper standard deviation and above the lower one. I think you can still do it with one inner query. Okay, okay, so I can't just use in. What do I have to use? I want where it is greater than. Now, and you say
Wow.
1
greater than.
greater than 1,000.
Well, greater than the average, where the invoice total is greater than the average invoice total, right?
The keys type average invoice total.
What?
Is it greater than?
Where invoice total is greater than average invoice total?
Yeah.
No, because average has to go on the select line.
Okay.
Now, here's what I wanted to point out here, and I was wondering if anybody was going to catch it. What is this? Well, it's invoice total. Yes, what type is that?
It's money.
Money, okay? It's basically, it's a number, okay? Now, and it turns into an integer. I mean, yeah, I know it's got 4 decimal points, but anytime we lock those decimal points and we fix them, it turns into an integer because all I have to do is just shift them in and out to work with it. And so I never get 5 decimal points. So it's always 4. What is this?
This is
1 row with 1 value.
That's a table that has 1 row and 1 value. So on one side of this inequality, I have a number. On the other side, I have a table with 1 row and 1 value. They are not the same thing. Do you understand my gripe here?
Wait, so that's not complete. That's not like correct, right?
If I did this, if I were to execute this, it's going to run. And there are the ones, I have 16 rows that are greater than average. Those are the vendor IDs. I guess some of them I have multiple values, so I probably should say
distinct.
yes. I'm going to talk a little bit about distinct here in just a minute. You don't use distinct in the subquery because when you're saying is it in, you don't say select distinct max because it's either in or it isn't. So don't make it be distinct. So now I'm going to get just the vendor IDs with no duplicates. And I don't know how many I'm going to have there. Okay, I have 8 rows that are greater than average. So I have 8 vendor IDs that are above average. Now, this works. This only works when the subquery has 1 row, 1 column. What happens? They say, well, you know, you guys want to do it this way. So many people write it that way. So many people understand it if you said where invoice total is greater than, select average invoice total, but it's not really the same thing. Okay. So since there's people like me who gripe about that kind of stuff, they gave us something, and the word all, greater than all of the things in that table. Now, what is all? All is the values in that table. So is the invoice total greater than the first one? Well, the first one's all there is. So now I'm comparing, obviously, currency to currency. There is another one that isn't used as much. It's any. It's greater than any of them in there. In other words, it's bigger than the smallest one. It's not used as much. Most of the time, so any time that you are using greater than or less than, it should, after the less than or greater than, we should have all. Similarly, when I have an in like this, it will allow me to say equal to. even though they are not equal to. So this one is going to run, and I get the same too, even though equal to does not apply. So we will never use equal to, we will never use not equal to, even though they work, because that is a logical error in SQL, and I just don't like it. It gives me the heebie-jeebies when I see money on one side and a table on the other side, and you're saying they are the same thing. They are not. But this does make sense, where it is in that set. Now, I don't have to say all of them or any of them. It's just either in the set or it's not. Okay, up here, we don't say select distinct vendor ID in the subquery. You might say select distinct vendor name up here. I don't know why I have that. But don't say distinct in the subquery. I don't care in the subquery if I get duplicates. It's either in the set or it's not in the set. Don't make the computer do extra work just because you want to write distinct. It'll actually slow the query down some.
So is in a way like the greater than and equal sign is like kind of overloaded?
Yes, I guess you could say it is overloaded. Yes. SQL is not an object-oriented language, so to say it's overloaded is that word overloaded came along a long time after SQL was kind of finalized. Overloading came around in the early 90s. SQL goes back to the 60s. Yes. Yes, greater than and equal to are overloaded, by given what that means. If you say greater than or less than, say greater than or less than all. If you say equal to or not equal to, replace it with in or not in. And I'll be happy. By the way, let's notice when I ran this, and I execute that, I got what? I got 8 rows. Now, I'm going to turn it around just for giggles. And I'm going to find the ones that are less than. So where they're less than the average. Execute. Notice that I got 29 rows. What does this tell us about our data? Above average are 8 rows, below average are 29 rows. We know that there are 37 rows, I agree. It's top heavy, yeah. The data are skewed, meaning that the average doesn't fall about the center. The average doesn't fall between the ends.
Lower than the median.
Right. The average, the mean, and the median are far apart. And whenever that happens, you know you have skewed data. We could calculate a standard deviation. For example, I could, find where, calculate a standard deviation where it's less than 1 standard deviation and greater than the mean. Quartiles would come in here, so I could find everybody in the first quartile. I don't believe I'm going to cover the standard deviation, but I might. Standard deviation, if you Google it, you'll figure out how to do it. I don't think our book covers it, but it's easy to do. It's just an aggregate function. You give it a range, take a standard deviation, it'll give you the standard deviation, add that to the mean, and get everybody that's less than that, subtract it from the mean, get anybody greater than that, and you have the first standard deviation. Now you do that a lot. I might do that as an example. Let's see what else we've got here. Okay, here, let's go back.
For like money, for data involving money, isn't usually the data usually top heavy because you only have negative invoices, so that
No, we don't have a normal distribution. Let's put it that way. I don't know. I don't know that you can make any generalizations about data sets. You know, they are what they are, and whatever you got's what you got. The fact that ours is skewed towards the high side, oh well. Okay, let's add. I want to see what that max invoice total was. Okay, so this guy, well, this is added. This one right here, select the vendor ID. So this one right here gave us the 2 vendor IDs who won the race or won the contest or whatever. Now, we'll skip over this one. I want to know what that winning value was. Okay, so I've added this winning value. Is it going to work? Oh, drat. I got an error message. Oh, no. Oh, I hate it when that happens and you're telling me what we don't have a group by. Agreed with that? I don't have a group by. Well, gee, since it's select distinct, I'm guaranteed only to have 2 or 3 or whatever. If I group by them, I'm guaranteed to get it. So I'm still only going to have 2 rows. But the rule says because I have an aggregate and a non-aggregate, that rule is never going to change. That's not a rule you get to break unless you like error messages. Break it if you want to. Group by vendor ID. Now he's going to work.
the distinct would be redundant.
The distinct is now redundant. I don't need distinct. Did I have distinct up there? I don't think I needed it up there. Anyway, I'm still going to get just 2 rows, but now I'm going to see the total. It should be the same for both of them. And there it is. It is $37,966.19 for both of them. So I can get that. Okay. Here's an exercise then. Let's see. I'm going to go see what this person that keeps texting me wants. I'm going to leave you with this one to do briefly. See, here's a challenge. I want you to add the vendor name to this. Add the vendor name. What table is the vendor name in? Mm-hmm.
Would that require a join?
It will require a join. Good thought. I want you to add it. I'm gonna go see if I can find out. Yeah, well, I want you to think about. I want you to write it. Yeah, I want you to write it and add in the vendor name, and I'll be back in just a second. I'm going to pause the recording and I'm going to go, somebody is texting me over and over again, and that's usually means, well, I hope it's not my wife trying to get hold of me, but I need to go check.